Good morning, fifth grade. We are beginning a new unit today, and we're going to be studying the Great Depression and the Mexican Revolution and Mexican immigration to the United States this week. And so today we're going to read two texts that focus on Mexican immigration. Our quick write says, "Have you ever had to move? How did you feel and why?" And if you haven't experienced a move, whether it's to a new apartment or a new school, you could write about how you think you might feel if you did have to move. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. It says, when and why did Mexicans immigrate to the United States? And today we're going to be working on analyzing details from two texts and summarizing the central ideas. Our vocabulary words for today are immigration, and that's when a group of people move from one country to another country where they were not born. The second, and so you would draw a line to this picture. You see people standing in line waiting to get into the country. The next word is segregation. That's when you set someone apart or put them, you separate them, you put them in another group based on their race, their gender, or like how much money they make. It's often a bad sign. And so we have this sign that demonstrates segregation, where it says, this is the restroom that the white people can use, and this is the restroom that African Americans can use. So they were segregated based on their race. And then the last one is discrimination. And that's when you treat someone differently because of their class or their gender or their race, other than their character. Okay, so we have these blue and black people are, they're including each other, but they're not including this orange person. So this orange person is being discriminated against. All right, go ahead and turn the page. And we're going to be reading the text called Early Americans. So make sure you have Early Americans out on your desk. And before we get started reading, we know that this is a nonfiction text. And so we're going to ask a how or why question about the title. And if we read the first sentence of the text, it actually has a how question for us that the author is going to answer throughout the text. So we're going to write that question down in box number 1. It says, how did Mexican Americans get to be such a large and important group in the United States? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to read. It says, how did Mexican Americans get to be such a large and important group in the United States? First, they've been coming to the United States longer than other people. Second, they are neighbors. Getting here requires no costly boat or plane ticket. So if we stop right there, our author has already answered the question. It says that there are 2 reasons, and then the author is going to expand on these 2 things throughout the article. But the author gave us our main idea as 2 parts right in that first paragraph. So we're going to put it together in box 1B. We would write, Mexican Americans have been immigrating to the United States longer than other groups due to their close proximity to the United States. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. All right, so one of the reasons Mexican Americans became such a large and important group is because they've been immigrating the longest, longer than any other group, and because they're so close to the United States. If you look at your map, we'll scroll down. Hang on, it's in here. Here we go. If you look at your map of the United States, you have it in your handouts. This is the United States, and south of the United States is Mexico. And so the author is telling us they don't have to take a boat or a plane to get to the United States. You can actually drive your car into the United States if you are a Mexican wanting to immigrate. So we're going to continue to read on page 1, and we're going to answer our questions as we go. I'm in the second paragraph. It says the first Mexican Americans were already living in the Southwest when it became U.S. territory in 1848. Some were wealthy landowners, but most tended small farms. They slowly became the minority as more settlers came from the east looking for mining profits. With these eastern settlers came prejudice. Many of the settlers were Protestants. This made it hard for them to accept Mexican Americans who were mostly Catholic. In addition, the eastern settlers wanted land. Though Mexican Americans had been living on their land for years, they were required to show proof of ownership. Many were cheated out of their land. So let's stop right there. If we go back to our map, it's going to be easier for us to understand these two paragraphs. So what the second paragraph is saying is that in 1848, this southwest part of the United States, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, this was actually part of Mexico. And in 1848, the United States took over this part of Mexico and said, now all of you Mexicans who are living in this area, you're now Americans. You belong to the United States. And so those people, many of them worked on farms and many of them were not wealthy. And so you had Americans moving from the east to the west, and they were settling in this new area. And so instead of saying, oh, you're already living here, okay, I'll move on and I'll find a piece of land that no one is living on, the Americans who were moving from the east to the west, instead they said, oh, where are your papers that show that this is your land? And the people living there said, we don't have papers, we've always lived here. And the Americans from the east said, oh, that means that you don't own it and this is my land now. So the Americans from the east actually took land from the Mexicans living in the U.S. territory. Okay, and one of the reasons our text says that they took this land is because they were prejudiced against them. The Mexican Americans were Catholic, and the Americans moving from the east to the west were Protestant. So they believed different things about God, and the Americans moving from the east thought that meant that they could treat the Mexican Americans differently, that they could treat them in a bad way and take their land because they didn't believe the same things about God. Okay, and so let's go to box 2. We scroll up to box 2. It says, how did the United States occupation of the Southwest Territory in 1848 affect the Mexican Americans living there? Okay, and so if we go back in our paragraph, we know that it affected them in one way is that they were treated differently because they were Catholic. And another reason in the third paragraph tells us that they were cheated out of their land. And so in box 2, for the first part, we would write, they experienced religious prejudice from the American settlers that moved into the territory because the Mexican Americans were Catholic and the settlers were Protestant. Press pause to write down the first part in box 2 and play when you're ready for the second reason. And for the second reason, we could say, as a result, many Mexican Americans were cheated out of their land. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 3. we're going to keep reading on page 2. And in box 3 it says, why did Mexicans immigrate to the United States between 1910 and 1930? And we're going to look for that answer on page 2. The first big wave of Mexican immigrants consisted of people fleeing the Mexican Revolution. Between 1910 and 1930, nearly 680,000 Mexicans moved to the United States. In these years, immigrants were a main source of labor in the American Southwest. They worked for low wages in factories and mines, or on railroads and farms. The work was sometimes dangerous and living conditions could be terrible. So if we go back to our question, it wants to know, why did Mexicans immigrate to the United States between 1910 and 1930? And it tells us that they were fleeing the Mexican Revolution. 680,000 Mexicans moved to the United States because they were fleeing the Mexican Revolution. So in the first part of box 3, we would write, Mexicans immigrated to the United States between 1910 and 1930 to flee the danger of the Mexican Revolution. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the second part. It says, based on the evidence in the text, what inferences can the reader make about the life of Mexican immigrants in the Southwest Territory? And so as we go back in this paragraph, it tells us that once they got to the United States, Mexican Americans worked for low wages in factories, mines, railroads, or farms. And this was sometimes dangerous, and the living conditions could be terrible. And so this lets me know that Mexican Americans had a difficult life when they came to the United States because they didn't make a lot of money and the work was dangerous. They also had terrible living conditions. So in the second part of box 3, I'm going to write down Mexican immigrants in the Southwest Territory had a difficult life because they worked for low wages and sometimes in dangerous circumstances. They also had terrible living conditions. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep going. And so at this point tomorrow, we're going to do boxes 4 through 6 and finish reading the passage. But today, I want you to start your paragraph for part 4. It says, how did Mexican Americans get to be such a large group of people in the United States? And so you can use your main idea, and you can also use details from boxes 2 and 3 to support your answer.